Ladies and gentlemen, before you were even aware of the challenge, before the storm arose, before the enemy plotted, God had already worked it out for you. You may not see it yet, but heaven has already declared your victory. The battle is not yours, it belongs to the Lord, and He has never lost a battle. There are moments in life when you feel surrounded, outnumbered, and overwhelmed. The enemy whispers that you won't make it, that the mountain is too high, that the valley is too deep. But I came to remind you today, God has already made a way. While you were worrying, He was working. While you were crying, He was planning your breakthrough. Look at the lives of those who walked before us. Joseph thrown into a pit by his brothers, betrayed and forgotten, yet God had already positioned him for the palace. The Israelites trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, yet before they ever cried out, God had already parted the waters in His divine plan. Daniel thrown into the lion's den, but before he even touched the ground, God had shut the mouths of the lions. What you are facing is not new to God. He is not caught off guard. He is not scrambling to come up with a plan. No, He already made a way. The sickness has a healing. The lack has a provision. The heartbreak has a restoration. The failure has a comeback. You may not see it yet, but faith is not about what you see. It's about trusting the one who holds the future in His hands. The enemy wants you to believe that it's over, that you've gone too far, that the situation is too messy. But let me tell you, God specializes in turning messes into miracles. He takes the impossible and makes it possible. He turns graves into gardens, mourning into dancing, pain into purpose. So rise up in faith, walk in confidence. You don't need to figure it all out. You need to trust the one who already has. Stop letting fear control your steps. Stop letting doubt paralyze you. You serve a God who calls dead things back to life, who speaks and storms are silenced, who moves mountains with just a word. Hold your head high, child of God. Your story is not over. Your best days are not behind you. What God has promised, He will fulfill. His word will not return void. No weapon formed against you will prosper. You are covered, anointed, and destined for greatness. So step forward boldly. Walk in the confidence of His promises. Because what the enemy meant for evil, God has already turned for your good. What looked like a dead end is just the beginning of a new miracle. What seemed impossible is already being made possible. Before you ever faced that struggle, before the problem even appeared in your life, God had already set the answer in motion. Nothing that happens to you is a surprise to Him. He is not reacting to your situation. He is the one who goes before you, making a way even when you can't see it. Many times when we go through difficulties, we feel like we are trying to figure things out on our own. We wonder how things will turn around, how we will overcome, how the problem will be solved. But God is not waiting until the last moment to come up with a plan. He already knew the end from the beginning. The moment you faced opposition, He had already prepared the way of escape. The moment you encountered the storm, He had already spoken peace over your life. What you are walking through is not a place of destruction. It is a place where His glory will be revealed. Think about the story of the Israelites when they stood before the Red Sea. Behind them, Pharaoh's army was closing in, and in front of them was a vast body of water that seemed impossible to cross. From a human perspective, there was no way out. Fear must have filled their hearts. They must have felt trapped, abandoned, and defeated. But God had already made a way. The Red Sea was always meant to part for them. It wasn't something that God figured out at the last moment. He had planned their deliverance before they even realized they needed it. When Moses stretched out his staff, the waters obeyed, because the word of the Lord had already gone forth. So often we look at our obstacles and think they are greater than us. We assume that just because we don't have the answer, God doesn't either. But He is not like man. He is sovereign, all-knowing, and almighty. He doesn't see problems the way we do. He sees them as opportunities for His power to be revealed. That sickness you are facing, God already declared your healing. That financial burden, God has already released the provision. That door that closed in your face, He has already prepared a better one to open. You may not see it yet, but your faith is the bridge that connects you to His promise. Look at the life of Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison. Everything seemed to be working against him. But what Joseph didn't know was that God had already positioned him for the palace. Every hardship, every betrayal, every delay was actually leading him to his destiny. When the time was right, God elevated him from the prison to the palace in a single moment. The suffering was never meant to destroy him. It was designed to place him exactly where God had called him to be. It is easy to get discouraged when things don't go as planned. We assume that delays mean denial and obstacles mean defeat. But what if the very thing you see as a setback is actually part of God's divine setup? What if the trial you are walking through is the very thing that will propel you into your destiny? When Jesus told His disciples to get into the boat and go to the other side, He knew a storm would arise. He wasn't surprised when the wind started blowing. Yet, He also knew that the storm had no power over them. While they were panicking, thinking they were about to perish, Jesus was at peace, walking on the very thing they feared. What was meant to destroy them became a platform for His glory. You might be wondering when your breakthrough will come. You may be waiting for a sign, for an answer, for a miracle. But the truth is, your breakthrough is already in motion. God has already declared it over your life. The healing has already been spoken. The provision has already been released. The victory is already yours. What He promised, He will fulfill. It may not happen in the way you expect, but it will happen in the way that brings Him the most glory. When you begin to understand that God's plan is already in motion, you stop living in fear. You stop allowing circumstances to dictate your faith. You stop doubting whether or not He will come through because you know He already has. The delay you are experiencing is not a denial. It is a divine preparation. Sometimes God allows us to go through the process because He is strengthening us for what's ahead. The Israelites were set free from Egypt, but they still had to go through the wilderness before reaching the promised land. It wasn't because God didn't have a plan. It was because He was preparing them for what was to come. Faith requires you to trust that even when you can't see the full picture, God has already painted the masterpiece. He has already aligned the right people, opened the right doors, and orchestrated events to bring about His perfect will. What you think is a delay is actually divine positioning. The waiting season is not a wasted season. The struggle is not without purpose. The tears you have cried, the nights you have prayed, the moments of doubt, God has seen them all, and He is working behind the scenes to bring His word to pass in your life. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to carry the burden of trying to solve every problem. Your job is to trust. Your responsibility is to believe. When you align your faith with what God has already declared, you will see His hand move in ways you never imagined. Doors will open. Favor will follow you, and what once seemed impossible will become a testimony of His power. Nothing you are facing is a surprise to God. Nothing is outside of His control. Before you even knew the problem existed, He had already prepared the solution. So stand firm in faith, knowing that what He has spoken will surely come to pass. Fear has a way of paralyzing you, making you doubt everything God has already spoken over your life. It whispers lies that make obstacles seem bigger than they really are. It tells you that you will fail, that things will never change, that you are not enough. But fear is a deception, a tool the enemy uses to keep you from walking in the fullness of what God has already prepared. Faith, on the other hand, sees beyond the natural. Faith understands that what God has promised will come to pass, even if circumstances suggest otherwise. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, his faith was stirred. He saw the impossible happening right before his eyes, and in that moment, faith overruled fear. He stepped out of the boat and began walking on water. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, fear crept in. He began to sink, not because the power of God had diminished, but because he allowed fear to control his actions. That is exactly how fear operates. It shifts your focus from the promise to the problem. It makes you forget what God has already spoken. In life, storms will come. There will be seasons of uncertainty, moments when things don't go as planned, times when you feel surrounded by challenges. But faith is not the absence of storms. It is the confidence that God is with you in the storm. Faith says, I may not see the way, but I trust that God has already made one. Faith declares, I may feel weak, but I know His strength is made perfect in my weakness. Hey. God is already working it out. Think about the story of the 12 spies sent to scout the promised land. 10 of them came back with a negative report saying, the land is beautiful, but the giants are too strong for us. Their fear made them forget the promise God had already given them. But Joshua and Caleb had a different spirit. They saw the same land, the same giants, the same obstacles, yet they responded with faith. We are well able to take the land, they declared. They understood that God had already gone before them. The giants were not a surprise to God. The challenges did not cancel out the promise. Fear caused the 10 spies to retreat, but faith propelled Joshua and Caleb forward. The ones who let fear control them never entered the promised land. But the ones who chose faith saw the fulfillment of God's promise. How many times do we miss what God has for us because we allow fear to dictate our steps? How often do we retreat when we should be advancing? Stay silent when we should be speaking? Give up when we should be standing firm? The enemy knows that if he can keep you afraid, he can keep you stagnant. He wants you to doubt, hesitate, and delay. But faith moves forward even when the outcome is uncertain. Faith steps out, trusting that God has already provided what is needed. Abraham was called to leave everything familiar and step into the unknown. He didn't have all the details. God didn't give him a roadmap, only a promise. Go to the land I will show you, God said. That's how faith works. It moves before it sees. It trusts before it understands. Abraham could have let fear hold him back. He could have demanded full clarity before obeying, but he chose faith, and because of that, he became the father of nations. Fear keeps you focused on the what ifs. What if I fail? What if I don't have enough? What if they reject me? But faith declares, even if I don't see it yet, I trust that God has already made a way. It understands that God is not limited by circumstances. He is not dependent on human logic. If he said he will do it, then he will. There's a reason why the Bible tells us over and over again, do not fear. God knew that fear would be one of the greatest weapons used against his people. It causes hesitation, doubt, and inaction. But the antidote to fear is faith. Faith is what makes you step out of the boat when everyone else stays inside. Faith is what makes you stand before giants with confidence, knowing that the battle belongs to the Lord. Faith is what causes walls to fall at the sound of praise, what makes barren wombs give birth, what turns valleys of dry bones into armies. The enemy will always try to magnify the problem. He wants you to look at the sides of the storm instead of the power of God. He wants you to focus on the opposition instead of the one who has already given you the victory. But faith refuses to be intimidated. Faith reminds you that you serve the God who split the Red Sea, who provided manna in the wilderness, who brought water from a rock, who raised the dead, who conquered sin and the grave. Faith doesn't deny reality, but it chooses to believe in a higher reality. The truth that God is sovereign, that he is in control, that he has already gone before you and made a way. The enemy may try to use fear to keep you bound, but he cannot stop what God has already declared. When you choose faith over fear, you align yourself with the promises of God. You step into divine provision, supernatural breakthroughs, and miraculous outcomes. Fear may whisper that you're not enough, but faith reminds you that God's grace is sufficient. Fear may tell you that the storm will overtake you, but faith knows that Jesus is in the boat. No matter what you are facing, choose faith. Trust that God has already worked it out. Stand firm in his promises. Don't allow fear to hold you back from what God has prepared for you. He has already gone before you, and what he has spoken over your life will surely come to pass. Every trial, every setback, every challenge you have faced is not the end of your story. It is a stepping stone to something greater. The difficulties you are going through are not meant to destroy you. They are designed to position you for a greater testimony. The enemy wants you to believe that your struggles are proof that God has abandoned you, that you are too far gone, that things will never get better. But what if the very thing you are battling right now is the foundation for a breakthrough you never imagined? Joseph's life is a perfect example of this. He had dreams of greatness, dreams of ruling, dreams of divine purpose. But instead of immediately stepping into that promise, he was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, and sold into slavery. From there, he was falsely accused and imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. To the natural eye, it seemed as if Joseph's life was moving further and further away from the promise God had given him. But what looked like a setback was actually a setup. Every painful moment was leading him closer to his destiny. The pit led to Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house led to the prison, and the prison led to the palace. When the time was right, in a single day, Joseph went from being a forgotten prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt. If Joseph had given up in the pit, he would have never made it to the palace. If he had let bitterness take root in prison, he would have never stepped into his purpose. What he thought was working against him was actually working for him. The betrayal, the delay, the injustice, God was using it all to position him for his destiny. And that is exactly what he is doing in your life. The storm you are facing is not the end of your story. It is not proof that God has forgotten you. It is proof that you are being prepared for something greater. Every great testimony begins with a test. Every great breakthrough comes after a battle. The Bible is filled with stories of men and women who had to go through the fire before stepping into their calling. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading the Israelites to freedom. David was anointed as king, but spent years running from Saul before taking the throne. Esther had to risk her life before saving her people. The process may not be easy, but the promise is always worth it. One of the greatest lies the enemy tells you is that your struggle is meaningless. He wants you to believe that you are suffering for nothing, that your pain has no purpose. But the truth is, God never wastes a battle. Every tear you have cried, every moment of confusion, every disappointment, God is using it all to shape you, to prepare you, to equip you for what is coming next. The pressure you are under is not meant to crush you. It is meant to refine you. Just like gold is purified in the fire, your faith, your character, and your strength are being refined through your trials. Sometimes God allows delays and detours because He is working on something bigger than what you can see. You may be frustrated because things aren't happening as fast as you would like. But what if God is protecting you? What if He is building the foundation to sustain what He is about to release in your life? A tree with shallow roots may grow quickly, but when the storms come, it will be easily uprooted. However, a tree with deep roots can withstand any storm. God is deepening your roots. He is strengthening your faith, increasing your capacity, and preparing you to handle the blessing He is about to release. The enemy thought he could break you, but he didn't realize that every attack against you was only making you stronger. The very thing the enemy meant for evil, God is turning for your good. What was meant to defeat you will become the very thing that elevates you. Your pain is birthing purpose. Your struggles are leading to strength. Your test is turning into a testimony that will encourage and inspire others. You are not just going through this season, you are growing through it. Every difficulty is teaching you something. It is teaching you resilience, patience, and trust in God's timing. It is showing you that even in the darkest moments, God is still working. It is reminding you that He is the author of your story, and He will bring everything together in His perfect time. Think about how many times in the Bible God used what seemed like setbacks to bring about miracles. The woman with the issue of blood suffered for 12 years, but her faith led her to Jesus. And with one touch, she was completely healed. The man who was blind from birth seemed like he was living in suffering, but his story became one of the greatest testimonies of Jesus' power. Lazarus was dead for 4 days, but his resurrection revealed God's glory in a way that no one had seen before. What you are going through right now is not permanent. The season of struggle will not last forever. What seems like an impossible situation is actually an opportunity for God to show His power in your life. The very thing that looks like your greatest burden may become your greatest blessing. God is not finished with you yet. He is still writing your story. What you see as a dead end, He sees as the perfect moment for a miracle. What you think is a failure, He sees as the necessary process for your growth. The testimony you are waiting for is already in motion. Keep holding on, keep trusting, and know that the very thing that is testing you today will be the testimony that glorifies God tomorrow. Life has a way of presenting situations that seem impossible to fix. Broken relationships, financial struggles, lost opportunities, and deep disappointments can leave you feeling hopeless. There are moments when it seems like everything is falling apart and no solution is in sight, but nothing is too hard for God. He specializes in taking what looks like a mess and turning it into a miracle. What seems shattered beyond repair is just raw material in His hands, waiting to be transformed into something greater than you ever imagined. The Bible is full of stories of people who faced impossible situations, yet God stepped in and changed everything. When Jesus stood before the tomb of Lazarus, people thought it was over. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and according to human logic, there was no hope. But Jesus never sees things the way we do. He doesn't operate within the limits of human understanding. He looked at that tomb and commanded Lazarus to come forth. And what was once dead came back to life. There is no situation in your life that is beyond the power of God. No matter how long it has been, no matter how broken it looks, He can restore, renew, and resurrect. When God steps in, He doesn't just fix the situation, He transforms it into something even greater. What the enemy meant for evil, God turns for your good. What looked like a failure becomes a setup for a testimony. What seemed like a loss becomes a stage for His glory to be revealed. Think about the story of the widow in 2 Kings 4. She was drowning in debt, and her creditors were coming to take her sons as slaves. She had nothing left, no way out, no hope. But when she turned to the prophet Elisha, he asked her a simple question. "What do you have in your house?" She replied that she had nothing except a small jar of oil. To her, it seemed insignificant. But in the hands of God, that little jar of oil became the key to her breakthrough. She obeyed the prophet's instructions, poured the oil into as many jars as she could find, and God multiplied it. What she thought was not enough became more than enough. She paid off her debts and had more left over. That is how God works. He takes what seems too small, too broken, too impossible, and He turns it into abundance. What you see as insignificant, God sees as the starting point of a miracle. The problem is that many people give up too soon. They look at their situation and assume that it's too late, that the damage is permanent, that nothing can be done. But God is never limited by what you see. He is not bound by human reasoning. Just because you don't see a way doesn't mean there isn't one. So many people in the Bible thought their situation was beyond saving. The disciples were on a boat in the middle of a violent storm, convinced they were about to die. But Jesus stood up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and immediately the storm ceased. A woman caught in adultery was moments away from being stoned, but Jesus stepped in and extended mercy, turning her shame into a testimony of grace. A man who had been blind since birth was seen as a hopeless case, but Jesus healed him, proving that his condition was never beyond God's power. It doesn't matter how broken something is. If it's in God's hands, it can be restored. He can take the most painful moments of your life and turn them into a source of blessing. The very thing that caused you heartache can become the foundation for something new. What was meant to break you can actually build you. The disappointment that made you question everything can be the birthplace of a new vision. Sometimes God allows things to break so he can rebuild them in a way that brings him greater glory. If something was taken from you, if a door closed, if a dream seemed to die, don't lose hope. God is still at work. He knows exactly how to bring beauty from ashes. What you think is a mess is just the beginning of your miracle. Look at the life of Job. He lost everything. His family, his wealth, his health. His friends told him to give up. His wife told him to curse God and die, but Job held on. He didn't understand why he was suffering, but he trusted that God was still in control. In the end, God restored everything he had lost. Double. What looked like a tragedy became a testimony of God's power to restore. God is not just a healer, he is a restorer. He doesn't just fix things, he makes them better than before. The years you thought were wasted, the opportunities you thought were gone, the things you thought were lost forever, God knows how to redeem them. Nothing is ever too far gone for him to resurrect. When Jesus fed the 5,000, all the disciples saw was a lack of resources. They only had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and to them it wasn't enough. But Jesus took what they had, blessed it, and multiplied it. What looked like a shortage became an overflow. That is how God works. He takes what seems insufficient and makes it more than enough. Your mess is not the end of your story. What you think is beyond repair is exactly where God does his best work. He is not looking at your situation in despair. He is looking at it with the eyes of a creator, a restorer, a miracle worker. He is waiting for you to trust him, to give him what little faith you have, to surrender the broken pieces into his hands. No matter what you have lost, no matter what seems impossible, God is still in control. He can turn your sorrow into joy, your struggle into strength, and your mess into a testimony that will glorify him for generations to come. Keep believing, keep trusting, and watch as he turns everything around in ways you never expected. Waiting is one of the hardest things to do, especially when you know God has promised something, but you have yet to see it come to pass. The time between the promise and the fulfillment can feel like a wilderness, a place of uncertainty and frustration. You pray, you believe, and yet nothing seems to change. It is in these moments that doubt tries to creep in. making you question whether God has heard you, whether he cares, or whether the promise was even real in the first place. But what you must understand is that God's timing is always perfect. He is never early and he is never late. He is always right on time, even when it doesn't feel like it. Abraham is one of the greatest examples of someone who had to trust in God's timing. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, but years went by and nothing happened. He and his wife Sarah grew older, and from a human perspective, the promise seemed impossible. Sarah even laughed when she heard that she would bear a child in her old age. But what seemed laughable to man was already established by God. At the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, just as God had promised. The delay was not a denial. God had not forgotten about Abraham and Sarah. He was simply preparing them for the fullness of what he had in store. Often when God makes us wait, it is because he is doing something in us before he does something for us. He is building our character, strengthening our faith, and teaching us to rely on him completely. If he gave us everything we asked for the moment we asked for it, we would never grow, never mature, never develop the strength we need to handle the blessing. Joseph also had to endure a long and painful waiting season. As a young man, he had dreams of greatness, dreams of ruling, dreams that God had placed inside of him. But instead of stepping into that promise right away, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. For years, it seemed like his life was moving in the opposite direction of what God had promised. But what Joseph didn't realize at the time was that every delay, every trial, every hardship was positioning him for the fulfillment of God's word. If Joseph had been promoted too soon, he wouldn't have been ready. The waiting season was where God refined him, humbled him, and prepared him for leadership. When the time was right, in one day, Joseph went from being a prisoner to second in command over all of Egypt. The wait was long, but the promise was sure. Many times we become impatient and try to make things happen on our own. We step ahead of God thinking we know best, but rushing the process never leads to true fulfillment. Look at what happened when Sarah and Abraham took matters into their own hands. Instead of waiting for God's timing, they decided to have a child through Hagar, Sarah's servant. That decision led to unnecessary complications, pain, and division. Whenever we try to force what only God can do, we end up creating more problems than solutions. But even then, God is merciful. He is able to take even our mistakes and work them for our good. David was anointed to be king as a young man, but he did not take the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves, and enduring hardship. It would have been easy for David to become. He was preparing him. By the time David finally became king, he was not just a man with a title. He was a man who had been tested, shaped, and strengthened through the waiting. God's delays are not his denials. Just because you don't see it happening right now doesn't mean it's not in motion. What you are praying for, believing for, and waiting for may not be visible yet, but that doesn't mean God is not working behind the scenes. He is aligning the right people, opening the right doors, and putting everything in place. Sometimes he is protecting you from something you don't even see. Other times he is waiting until your heart is in the right position to receive what he has for you. Look at Jesus. He waited 30 years before beginning his ministry. He could have started earlier, but he waited for the appointed time. And when the time came, he stepped into his purpose with full authority, ready to fulfill everything he was sent to do. Waiting is never easy, but it is always worth it. The key is to trust God, even when you don't understand. Keep praying, keep believing, keep preparing, because when the time comes, what he has spoken will surely come to pass. Nothing can stop the plan of God, and no delay can cancel his promises. The waiting is not wasted. It is working for your good. When the appointed time arrives, everything will fall into place and you will see that God was faithful all along. No matter what you are facing, no matter how long you have been waiting, and no matter how impossible things may seem, God has already worked it out for you. The struggles, the delays, the setbacks, they are not signs of defeat, but part of the divine process leading you to your destiny. Every test you endure is shaping you. Every trial is strengthening you. And every moment of waiting is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. God is not bound by human limitations. What looks broken, he can restore. What seems lost, he can redeem. What appears to be a setback is often a setup for something far beyond what you expected. If he has given you a promise, it will come to pass in his perfect time. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail, aligning every opportunity, and positioning you for victory. Now is not the time to give up. Now is not the time to lose faith. Trust that God's timing is perfect. His plan is greater and his ways are higher. Keep believing, keep standing, and keep moving forward, because when the appointed time comes, you will see the manifestation of everything he has spoken. Your testimony is already in motion, and what God has worked out for you will be greater than anything you could have planned for yourself. Stay faithful, because your breakthrough is on the way. Thank you.